Hello, thank you and welcome to the first of maybe many, or maybe this will be the only one, I don't know, series of videos where I will simply answer questions. Before I do that, let me give a little bit of context to why I'm doing this. My favorite YouTube channel is Adam Savage's Tested. I consume every bit of their content, and I watch the long form videos of Adam just tinkering away in his shop. But my favorite thing is whenever he answers listener questions or fan questions or subscriber questions, and then just shares his experience to speak to the questions. His answers are never what I would think they would be, and they almost always pull from his experience, and they're always insightful. So while I don't have the, I don't know, while I don't have the long career experience that Adam has, I do feel like I have um, a unique perspective that I can share, at least in this stage in my life and in my career, as a animation studio owner, as a father, as somebody who has been in and out of jobs and feels like I found my place and my thing. So I want to share that with you. And also, this is also just a way for me to make more content that is low hanging, but hopefully meaningful, or at least can be helpful to whether you're an aspiring animator, somebody just looking for insight, or maybe you just want to put on a video and veg out for a bit. Maybe this will be interesting. I don't know. We're going to see it. So I have 15 questions here that I have gathered from I asked a handful of people on my Instagram account and just some friends to shoot me questions that they would want to know. So in no particular order, I have 15 questions. I don't have any idea how long this is going to take, but I'm going to go through each of them. All right, here we go. How do you handle creative blocks or burnout? How do you handle creative blocks or burnout? How do I handle creative blocks or burnout? My experience with burnout has been, I'll say this, I don't feel like I get burnout too much. And I think that's largely because I found a good balance of work-life balance. That's always something that I'm having to balance or strive to make sure that I'm not getting, too, I don't know, hyper focused on the job at hand or the task at hand. But the thing is, I love what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing, and this studio, my work has grown out of an abundance of joy in doing the thing that I want to do. Where I found I've gotten burnout. I remember when I used to work at the University of Oklahoma. I was like a videographer, photographer, and the burnout came whenever I was doing the thing that I loved. I had a camera in hand. I was telling stories, but the burnout came whenever I came to resistance over and over and over, and felt like my experience or my I couldn't meet needs, I guess. And I won't get into like the reasons, but like I think burnout comes from, for me, a lack of feeling like you're meeting your potential. And so you can be doing the thing that you want, the thing that you love, telling stories. I always remember like feeling bad because sometimes I'd complain and be like, this sucks, or like I'm bummed because of my day at work. And then there's a part of me in the back of my brain that would be like, why are you complaining? You're going to work and you get to, put an SD card inside of a Canon camera and go take photos or go tell stories. And it's like, you could be doing something else entirely different that's not creative at all. So stop complaining, Mason. And there's a part of that I think is good to hold, a good perspective to hold, but also there is something in myself and in a lot of creative people that, they want to meet needs. They want to give their talents to a problem and help solve it. And there's just been times in different moments in my career and growing up where I felt like I had the ability to solve problems, but I wasn't given the chance. And I think after a while, if that happens long enough, the joy of going to work with a camera in your hand starts to not that you start to not care about that as much because, really the joy of going to work is not to get, if you're creative, it's not to like hold a paintbrush or a camera. It's to be creative and tell stories with whatever medium you're using. And so, how do you handle? I don't know. I don't think I'm answering this question. How do you handle the creative blocks or burnout? The way I handled it at OU was eventually I quit, and that's very nuanced. There's a lot going on there that I won't get into, but I would say setting up boundaries for yourself and making sure that you are not setting up boundaries for yourself. That's creative burnout. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that. I've probably talked enough about it though. Maybe I need more specific of a question. I don't know, and I don't know if that was helpful or not. But we're gonna move on to number 2. What's the smallest detail you've ever animated that no one would notice but you? What's the smallest detail you've ever animated that no one would notice but you? My favorite animation I've ever done was it was like a dream gig for Jurassic World for Universal Pictures. It was for like it was after Jurassic World. It was like promoting Jurassic World Dominion. I don't think it was Fallen Kingdom. It was Dominion. It was like a couple years back. It was before we had the studio space, and I was animating in my home studio. And it was an animation of a T-Rex made from a Hasbro. It was like fabricated from multiple versions of a Hasbro T-Rex, walking into the scene and then biting down on a package. And then like walking away with it, and it was like this like doorbell ring view style perspective, and it was really cool. It was like technically I think one of like the best animations that I've done. And I'll say this: I usually like there's a few things that I can look at that I've done or that I specifically have animated, and I think is good. That's one of them. I look back at that and I go, man, I really like how that turned out. But the aspect ratio to match the Ring doorbell camera is like 4:5, so not 16:9 as I was shooting it. And so when I animated it, there's a part where like he walks up. I'm trying to think how this looks. He walks up to the door, and then he has this tail waving like off to like the left fourth or fifth of the frame, and it's just like subtly moving and shifting with the weight of the T-Rex, and it's beautiful, and you will never see it because I had to crop that out. And I remember being so bummed because I put so much love and energy into like just the tail part of it as it's moving. And anyway, so the tail of a T-Rex that you'll never see. What tools or equipment do you rely on the most for your work? What tools or equipment do you rely on most for your work? The easiest answer to that is Dragon Frame. It's a software that is kind of the industry standard for stop motion. It gives you the ability, you plug your camera into it, or it can be your iPhone or whatever imaging capture device that you have. You plug it into your computer, and then it gives you, all the bells and whistles that modern day stop motion studios need and have. So playback, onion skinning, you can have guide layers, you can input a whole bunch of stuff into it to help aid your animation. So, as far as like the actual like nitty gritty animation part of things, the tool that's most useful is 100% Dragon Frame. Maybe that's not the question that you're asking though. What tool? I have a lot of rigs that I've gotten from Kinetic Armatures. Fellow YouTuber Eduporta from, I think, what is this YouTube channel name? Maybe it's just Eduporta. He's a YouTuber, and he also has like a milling company that makes rigs, like armature rigs for stop motion animators. And so I've bought probably like 4 or 5 of those from him. And so that's also probably like a really important tool. What advice would you give to someone starting a stop motion studio? What advice would you give to someone starting a stop motion studio? I would say, advice would you give to... I guess my first bit of advice would be, is starting a quote-unquote studio even necessary? Are you doing it just because you want to have a studio? to say you have an animation studio? Or would it make more sense for you to be an animator that can get work doing various animation gigs? I don't, so it kind of just depends, like, what are your goals? I would, caution against wanting to do anything, whether it's starting a studio or a small business or a production company or whatever it is, just for the sake of saying you have this business or you have this production company. I don't think that's a good reason to do it. And I know a lot of people that want to be like, they'll spend a ton of time on the logo of their business or their production company or their studio, and they won't spend a lot of time actually doing any of the work that justifies the logo. So I would say, make sure you're getting into it for the right reasons. But beyond that, let's say you're getting into it for the right reasons, I would say build up. Try not to worry about getting big clients first. Just build up your portfolio, build up your resume, your body of work. And then try to never be satisfied with what you're doing, and try to make sure that every project you do, you give everything to that project. I can look back at my work over the last 7 years and look at my starting project, or look at the first project I did once I quit my job and went full-time freelance animator. And it's not great, but the next project was better. And the next project after that was better. And each time I remember getting a project, I would make a point to visualize what that project in my head should look like. And I remember, and I always ask myself the question, like, if I take on this gig, what's the still image? What's the 2-second clip of it that I want to put on my website that people are going to see and be like, ooh, that's cool. And if I can't think of something that looks cool or that would support the idea that looks awesome or that's engaging or that's fun, I don't do it. Or I wait before accepting the project, or maybe that's just part of the concepting phase before I accept it. But I would say advice would be, if you're starting out and you're trying to do this professionally or as some kind of business, make sure that you are really trying, that you care about the work that you're doing, and that each time you do it, you try to make it better than the last. And I can look back at almost all my projects and point to specifically how I got better and better and better, or how my studio or the people that I work with get better and better and better with each project. There's a couple in there, very few, but there's probably like 3 or 4 gigs that I've taken over the last couple years that I wasn't excited about. Didn't really care to do it, but I was either doing it kind of as a favor because it was a client that gave me a lot of work, or is one agency that gave me a lot of work, and I wanted to make sure that I do it because I don't want to say no to them. But I wasn't excited about it, and I can look at those projects and tell I wasn't excited about this, and it shows through the work, and that's terrible. That's terrible for you as an animator or a studio owner, but also for the client, because they want to make sure. I mean, I will say this: the client loved it; it was great to them, but it wasn't to my standards. So care, I guess, going back, what's this advice to someone starting a stop motion studio? Care. If it's very hard, but if you care and you're passionate about it, it'll be worth it. Okay, next question. What inspired you to start a stop motion animation studio? I kind of touched on this earlier a little bit. What inspired me to start? I'll say, like, I was never like, I want to have a stop motion studio. It was more of like it just kind of became the thing that it is. And what I mean by that is, like, I had a full-time job. I was already like, I was already, very much into photography and videography, whether that was doing weddings or whether that was doing portraits or whatever it might be. And I love doing that. And when I wasn't doing that, I was in my shop doing woodworking or building something. And anytime that I could, like, build something for a project, that always felt good because it was kind of filling up all my buckets. But the problem with being a photographer / videographer anywhere in the United States, is that there's, they're a dime a dozen. Uh, there's so many photographers, there's so many videographers. So one, it wasn't very niche, especially at that time. I was like, I don't even know really what direction I want to take. Do I want to do videography? Do I want to be a director? Should I, and director can be a very like ambiguous, ethereal thing too. Like direct what, And so I'll say this, like over the course of my life, and specifically, in adulthood and in my career, I've got a lot of I've got clarity to what I think helps make you successful, and that is um, picking a niche and trying to specialize in one thing and not trying to do everything. I know so many creators, photographers, and videographers that want to make a living doing what they love, and so they market themselves as kind of a catch-all. I can do photography. I can be a drone pilot. I can also do stills. I can be a second shooter. And it's like if you're doing all those things, you're probably not going to be the person that gets called upon when somebody wants a really good, you know, drone pilot or a really good videographer. Because even within that, what kind of drone pilot are you? A first person, point of view? What are the FPV drone pilots? Are you like a cinematic drone pilot? Do you have a pilot's license that enables you to fly big rigs that can hold really expensive, Alexa cameras? Alexa, is that Alexa? Anyway, I'm not a huge like film dude. Um, but are you a videographer that does weddings? What kind of weddings? Like documentary style weddings, or are you doing like? So anyway, what I'm trying to say is like, I found myself, uh, kind of like not really having a solid sense of direction, um, and that hindered me because I wasn't able to make any forward progress. I had all this energy and desire and passion to do good and to make good content, but it was not funneled into one avenue, so it was just spread thin. And I think a lot of people are spread thin. They spread themselves very thinly. I have a friend who's a photographer, and he wants to. He's often talking to me. He's like, Mason, I want to build something like you've built, or I want to get these gigs, and I want to be like the go-to photographer. And I always tell him over and over and over again, you need to like pick a lane and be a specific type of photographer, a product photographer, a food photographer, and I can look at his website, but he's got like architectural photography, he's got like wedding photography, he's got some product photography. And so, if I'm a client that wants to give you 20 grand to take, to do one session for my product, whatever it is, I'm going to find the person that does this type of product photography, and not somebody who just can do everything. Because if you can do, what's the phrase? A jack of all trade is a master of none. That's my advice. I'm going to move on to the next question. How do you come up with ideas for your projects? I often don't come up with ideas for my projects. At this point in my life, or in our studio's life, clients come to us, or maybe I'll reach out, do cold calls to clients, and what at that point, if I'm cold emailing people, it's, hey, I have a studio. Here's what I can do. Here's my website. This is the type of work that I do. These are the type of agencies that I partner with typically to create work. I'm not like coming up with ideas. The idea generation comes from a client coming to us and saying, hey, we have X amount of dollars to spend on this project, and in this project what we need to do is showcase this thing, and these are our target audiences. Sometimes the client will come to us and be like, hey, they'll come to me sometimes with an animatic or a storyboard already ready to go, and they go, can you execute on this? VI Marketing and Branding, an incredible agency in Oklahoma City. My first big gig is what I say. My first gig that really pushed me in so many ways was called The Apartments. It was a PSA, all about secondhand smoke, all about secondhand smoke. And they came to me and said, with basically the video already realized, they were like, can we do this? And I was able to watch the video, had sound, had voiceover, and I had a very clear picture of like what the video was. And they said, can you do this but in stop motion, essentially? So that was great because at that point it was very clear what they wanted, and there wasn't a lot of ideation that I had to do outside of like kind of, you know, funneling down the creative execution on styles and art direction and stuff like that. But there are other clients that come and say, you know, we want to do this one thing. What can you do? And it's a lot broader. And at that point, we do come up with ideas. And how do we come up with ideas? It's anything. And it kind of just depends on what the project is. Some of it is not just like, you know, as an idea, a light bulb that pops up. Oftentimes, it's my team and I have a whole list of things that we want to do and execute, different styles, and they're kind of, but we don't have a reason or the money to execute. So if a client comes along and our ideas, the things that we're already passionate about, can make sense or coincide with their product or their messaging, then we'll try to do that. You know, and another great example of that is the Travel Oklahoma spot that we got to do. I wanted to do, for a long time, I've wanted to do felt style puppets. And I also really wanted to like do some like outdoor scenery. And those two things really got to come to life in our Travel Oklahoma spot. And that was a great example of that, I guess. I don't know. What's your favorite making tool that isn't camera related? What's your favorite making tool that isn't camera related? Excuse me. Well, looking at my shop right now, making tool that isn't camera related. Boy, I don't know. I do love this bandsaw. I have a bandsaw back here. I use it for everything from cutting wood to cutting foam. So is it, what was the question? What's your favorite making? It's gotta be, that's my favorite. It's the most widely and diversely used tool in the shop. And every once in a while it breaks, the motor stops running, or I have to replace a blade, or something happens to it because it's super old. And when that happens, it sucks, especially if we're in like the fabrication process of an animation or of a project, because it's so useful. I use it all the time. What's your favorite making? If you weren't animating, what would you be doing? If I wasn't animating, what would I be doing? That's a great question. If I wasn't animating, like I assume the question means if I wasn't doing, like if I wasn't an animator, if I didn't have an animation studio, what would be the other job that I would be doing? Boy, I'm gonna say something that to myself sounds pretentious. And I think like architecture, doing something involved with like architectural design. In fact, if I had been a better student in middle school and high school, and by better student, I mean if I had applied myself or just found a reason to be passionate about math, because I suck at math. Even to this day, I suck at math. But nowadays, I find myself much more drawn to the use of math and how it's applied to different things, especially in like astrophysics it's just more. It seems more practical now than it ever was when I was like in middle school and high school, and so I just didn't care, and so I dragged my butt on learning it, and I'm also not very, you know, I'm a very like creative person, so the administrative, you know, what's the word? Analytical side of my brain is not the strongest thing. But you know, if I go back and say, if I just applied myself more in math, I think I could be. There's a YouTube channel called 20 by 40. I think it's called 20 by 40 or 20 by 30. Basically, he's like an architecture, a guy who's like architectural designer. He has his own studio space and he makes amazing YouTube videos. They also just look beautiful. I love watching his content. But I love watching his content and I see the stuff that he does and it's designing and it's laying out and it embodies a lot of the same type of stuff that we do in stop motion from like a project management perspective. But it's also creative. And so I don't know, there's a part of me that watches those videos from this guy. And I could see myself doing that, but that's never going to happen because I'm 35 and I already have doing this thing that I love. But in another universe, I'm an architectural designer. How do you decide when a project is done? How do you decide when a project is done? That's a good question. The most obvious answer to that relates to me as like a business owner, because there comes a point where we work within milestones and hard deadlines. For example, we're working on a Super Bowl ad right now. Well, the Super Bowl is in early March, and so we have a hard deadline to make sure that we get the client the video by the time they have to have their ad buy and submit it and all that stuff to actually air. So, the project's going to be done when I deliver them the final cut. And there's a date on a board over here this is when the final cut's due. And then as far as like forecasting out timelines and production schedules and stuff, kind of reverse engineer from they need this video by then. So that means I'm going to give it a week before then where we have our actual final cut. A week before then, we're going to have our second rough draft. A week before then, we have our initial cut. And then 2 weeks before then, we have principal photography. And then a month before then is when we enter into fabrication. And that's just, and that is how I forecast out or plan out the production. It's kind of reverse engineering from when do they have to have the final video and making sure I build in time for revisions, for client feedback, for accidents that might happen, and make sure we cover our ground for a good, healthy production. What is the most challenging part of running a stop motion animation studio? I think the challenges change over the last 4 or 5 years as I've kind of been freelancer, and really the last couple of years as I've had more of an actual studio. But really, it's like the challenges change and evolve. Right now, my challenges are balancing my duty as a creative director and understanding what I can execute on, and like understanding what my studio can execute on and promise to a client, and we deliver on that. And that bit of information takes a lot of learned knowledge, institutional knowledge, specifically for LoudCloud, for my studio, that is not immediately transferable or understandable for a lot of people. So that's something that I, as Mason, the owner of the studio, really the only ones that understands that and knows that, specifically the needs. But I'm to a point now where we're taking on enough projects. We have a brick and mortar space that has fixed overhead costs that requires a lot of things like, it requires a lot of administrative duties that I'm terrible at. A second ago, I spoke to you about how I'm a creative mind and the administrative side of my brain is lacking, so I am finding right now that the work that we're doing is scaling up big enough that it necessitates these other things for me to address. And so now I found, the hardest thing about being a studio owner is balancing out the things that I love, the creative side, the storytelling, the world building, and then being able to support that with the administrative duties, the organization, the salaries and taxes and networking and stuff that really is necessary to make sure that it supports this other thing. So right now, the challenge has been balancing that entrepreneur, the business owner with the creative side. But 2 years ago, that wasn't really the case. I was working out of my home studio, which was 700 square feet, but my mortgage paid my studio space because they were one and the same. And the nature of our productions were smaller, so they didn't necessitate a lot of the type of organization that I have to have for the projects that I'm doing now. I also didn't have as many people that I work with. I wasn't outsourcing certain aspects of production. So the hardest thing at that time was probably getting work. Well, that's still hard, but making sure that I could get the work that I wanted to get. That was probably my focus at the time. Before then, if I were to go back before I got into my home studio space where I was just animating out of my garage, I was doing that while also having a job. So, going back to the burnout question, trying to not be burnt out. And in fact, a lot of the thing at the time, I didn't like my job. When I worked, backtracking, when I worked at the university, before I had a quote unquote proper animation studio, and I was just kind of a freelancer on the side of my full-time gig. My full-time gig was very disheartening, and I wasn't finding fulfillment in it. And so it was my animation stuff that was giving me value and fulfillment. I was pushing myself. It filled all the buckets of video, photo, creating things. But the challenge there, I guess, was finding that balance. And at one point, there was a big challenge, which was, when do I quit my full-time job to pursue this other thing that I love? And that's a different question. What's the weirdest material you've ever used in an animation? The weirdest material I've ever used in an animation. We did a animation for Mortal Kombat 1 or MK1 for the Warner Bros. Creator Collective. I can't remember what the context was of us producing that, but we made a video. It was really cool. I love this animation. I wish I had some of my. Do I have anything here? Hold on. This was the weirdest stuff that I ever used for an animation. There's a part where there's Mortal Kombat, so there's a lot of blood, and so we needed to animate blood, and we needed to animate it like kind of spilling out slowly across the frame. And so I asked a friend, Lindsay Burkebile, who runs her own animation studio, Planet Super, which is awesome. They're like when Lindsay and I talk, we kind of consider our studios like brother sister studios, because I feel like we're kind of like the same size, scope, been on a lot of the same projects, and I've been fortunate to have Lindsay out for a project to animate on, and I can't wait to eventually I'll bring her out to Oklahoma again and she'll animate on other projects for Loud Cloud. Incredible animator, incredible studio. But anyway, so all that to say, when I have questions sometimes, and I don't know what to do, I'll reach out. She's one of the people that I'll reach out to, and she was like, "You need to get clear quake hold gel for securing glass and crystal." So I think if you are messing with stuff, if you are a jeweler, you can put this down on like a workstation, and then you can put a piece of jewelry in there and it'll stick, and then you can kind of like mess with it. So it's very malleable, but it's not wet, but it's clear and translucent. See if you can, I don't know if this will pick up, but that's what it looks like. And after a while, you can see right now, I've messed with it. After a couple hours, this will kind of level out. What's that word called? Whenever you have like the malleability of something. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called. The word will come to me in a little bit. Anyway, so we use this. I put red. I think Lindsay said to use food coloring. I'm not for sure, but I ended up using paint because that's all I had. So it was kind of sticky and it kind of messed up the malleability. Um, but we just sat it down there and then we just added little by little, and it was really cool, and it was great for blood and guts and stuff. So little trick. Thanks, Lindsay. Um, how long does it typically take to complete a stop motion project? Boy, that kind of depends. That really depends on the project. We are currently working on that Super Bowl ad that I mentioned. That is going to be about a 2-month project when it's all said and done for 30 seconds. I am doing I'm doing a 15-second video that will take all of a day to actually animate. But yeah, so that the Super Bowl ad, that's going to take a week of animation. This other video that I'm doing that's 15 seconds long, it will take 1 day to animate. But within both of these productions, there are various other, the various amounts of other things that are contributing to how long is the pre-production process. So, for the 30-second Super Bowl spot, there's a whole month and a half of fabricating and testing that we're figuring out. For the 15-second spot, that's going to take just a day to animate. This is an example of a client coming to me with a storyboard. They already knew what they wanted. So there's not a lot that we're having to do as far as the fabrication side of things. There will be, as we get closer to it, there's going to be a whole probably week or 2 weeks that we dedicate to making sure that all the ducks are in the row for that production, because we're going to have a big motion control arm, and there's a huge. I need a big space to do it. So it just depends. There's no right or wrong answer to that, because it just depends. I think in movies, as far as the animation time goes, I think they want sometimes a second a day, anywhere between 1 to 3 seconds a day. I've heard. I've never animated or been a part of an actual West Coast feature-length film. That's something I'd love to be a part of one day. So if you're in the know and you want to have a Okie animator or just open up a set to me, I'd love to see what that looks like. But I think it's 1 to 3 seconds a day for Leica films or Wes Anderson films. Maybe a little bit more or less depending on the complexity. For TV shows, I think it's anywhere between 5 to 15 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds a day, I think. And so, I just finished an animation earlier today that took me about 5 hours, and it was 15 seconds long. That's a much lower hanging fruit. So it's not the animation fidelity is much less than what you would expect, or what would be needed for a feature-length film or something you're going to see on TV. How long does it typically take to complete a stop-motion project? That's what I just asked. What's your go-to activity when you're not working or parenting? What's your go-to activity when you're not working or parenting? First off, I need to put this up because it's fun to play with. It's distracting me. Go-to activity when you're not working or parenting. I love doing yard work. Typical dad. I love, but go-to, I don't really do yard work all the time. So my go-to activity is going to be watching TV or movies. Hanging out with family. I should probably say that first. Hanging out with family, hanging out with my daughter, my partner, her daughter. I love going out to eat and drink, finding new places. Go-to activity, it's got to be watching TV. Currently I'm watching, and I plan on when I get done with this, going home and watching Dune Prophecy. I'm 2 or 3 episodes in on that, and I'm excited to see what happens in that story. 2 more left. What's a movie or filmmaker that deeply inspires your work? What's a movie or filmmaker that deeply inspires your work? Well, I got into filmmaking and being interested in any of this because of Steven Spielberg. I remember watching all the movies that I loved as a kid: Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, and watching all the getting the additional BTS VHS, the behind the scenes VHS that you could get that accompanied some of those films, and just devouring them, watching them. I watched the behind the scenes of Jurassic Park and The Lost World more times than I watched the film. And it was just incredible to see that, these stories that I love were brought to life by people, and that's their job. And I was enthralled by that, and it definitely planted a seed that led me to do what I do today. What sets your studio apart from others in the industry? Well, when I think of studio, I think of big studios, like like the Leica, like the Bix Pigs, like the Stupid Buddies. Well, the Stupid Buddies is not probably as big, but like the Shadow Machine. So I am not that big. LoudCloud, we expand and contract based off the needs of our project. We are getting bigger projects. The threshold for the type of projects that we do has, the barrier to entry has gone up and up and up, which I love, and that's great because that means I can support myself, I can support my team, and I can do cooler work. But I would say, the thing that separates us is going to be, I don't know, probably that we're in Oklahoma, that this is that for the most part, we try to use local people and local talent whenever we can. There's not a lot of stop motion animators in Oklahoma or in Oklahoma City. There are a few, and we rely on those people when we can. But when we have big projects, we'll have to fly in other animators. But beyond that, in puppet fabrication, which is its own thing, and we're starting to be able to do some of that stuff in-house with Okies, which is great. The biggest thing that separates us is that, we're in Oklahoma. If I lived on the West Coast, there's no way in the world that I would be able to have this big animation space. There's no way in the world I would be able to produce the type of content that we produce, just because the overhead for it is so astronomically higher on the West Coast or the East Coast that it just wouldn't be possible. So, I am so thankful that I live in Oklahoma, a flyover state that a lot of people refer to it as a flyover state. Keep flying over because I love it. Material is cheaper, space is cheaper, but we can, and that trickles down to allowing us to produce content that's at similar quality than at those on the coast or bigger studios, but not charge as much, or we charge similarly, and then the difference is I can pay the people that I work with, the animators that I fly in, my team, and myself a very fair and reasonable amount. And that's something I don't ever want to lose sight of. As we continue to grow, I want to make sure that, more than anything, more than the work that we were known for, I want the people that work at LoudCloud to feel valued, and to not feel like they're just a cog in the machine, but that they are part of a creative collective. That sounds really buzzwordy, but that they're part of a creative process that really prizes people above product, and that's one of our values. So yeah, I would say that's what separates us. I feel fortunate to be where I am and to have the space that we have and the things that we have to make the content that we make, and to do it in a way that I am proud of and I feel like doesn't step on people. So I'd say that's what separates us. There are other studios out there. Earlier I mentioned Planet Super, and I know that they share a lot of the same DNA that we do, and I love them. And so, anyway, yeah, that's what sets us apart. That was 15 questions. So I'll be curious to know if anybody watches this. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch it. I know on this channel I have been very laxed and I have not posted a lot. And that's because I've been doing this. I've been building this animation studio, and so I've been busy, just not busy doing YouTube content. But I think this is a way that I can put out more content more often. It's low-hanging fruit, but hopefully still meaningful to you guys. So I guess, if you made it all the way to the end, please watch. Please comment in the bottom any questions that you have for the next time I do this, and let me know what you think of this longer form content. And thanks. Good to see you again.